Doctors examining the brain of 27-year-old Aaron Hernandez found damage rarely seen in someone that young. The former Patriots tight end had severe CTE, changing the conversation around football, violence, and the brain. So let's walk through exactly what was on that table in a Boston lab, what the doctor who cut it open actually said, and why it stunned even the people who study this disease for a living. Aaron Hernandez's brain shocked the doctors who studied it, and here's how that discovery unfolded. On a Thursday in November of 2017, reporters packed into a conference room at Boston University for what had been billed as a routine research briefing. It turned out to be anything but. Dr. Ann McKee, the director of BU's CTE Center, stood in front of a screen showing slides of brain tissue and delivered findings that made headlines across the country within hours. Hernandez, just 27 when he hanged himself with a bedsheet, was riddled with stage 3 CTE to a degree that we've never seen in our 468 brains except for individuals very much older. McKee told the news conference she wasn't speaking in vague terms. Individuals with similar gross findings were at least 46 years old at the time of death, she said. Hernandez was 27. That's not a small gap. That's 2 decades of brain damage packed into a body that hadn't even hit 30. CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a disease that has 4 stages. Is a progressive illness found in athletes and others who have suffered repeated concussions and other brain trauma, and it is associated with dementia, mood changes, and aggression. Hernandez had stage 3 out of 4. Stage 4 is the ceiling. It's the worst the disease gets, and McKee's team found him sitting right below that ceiling at an age when most people are still building their careers, not having their brains compared to men old enough to be their fathers. The specifics of the damage were laid out plainly, especially in the frontal lobes, which are very important for decision-making, judgment, and cognition. We could see damage to the inner chambers of the brain, McKee said as she screened slides showing sections of Hernandez's brain, adding, "This would be the first case we've ever seen of that kind of damage in such a young individual." Think about what that means. The frontal lobe isn't some minor corner of the brain. It's the part that lets a person weigh consequences, control impulses, and reason through a decision before acting on it. And in a 27-year-old, that region looked like it belonged to someone in their 60s. McKee said CTE had significantly impacted key parts of Hernandez's brain, including the hippocampus, which is associated with memory, and the frontal lobe, which is involved in impulse control, judgment, and behavior. 2 of the brain's most important regulatory systems, both compromised, both showing wear that had no business being there at his age. What made the finding even stranger was the condition of the organ itself. Researchers weren't looking at a damaged, deteriorated specimen overall. Quite the opposite. While the outside of Hernandez's brain appeared normal, the inside was riddled with CTE. McKee said, "From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. Crack it open, and the picture flipped entirely." McKee described physical changes that went beyond the microscopic tau buildup associated with the disease. There was evidence of previous small hemorrhages, which experts associate with head impacts, and other parts, like the hippocampus, had begun to shrink, with large holes found in his brain's membrane. Shrinkage, holes, in a man not yet 30 years old. She repeated the comparison for emphasis, because she wanted the room to understand just how far outside the norm this was. "These are very unusual findings to see in an individual of this age," McKee said, adding, "We've never seen this in our 468 brains, except in individuals some 20 years older." 20 years! That's the number that stuck. Out of nearly 500 brains that BU's center had examined by that point, nothing came close to matching what they were seeing in someone Hernandez's age. The tissue itself was described as exceptionally well preserved, which gave researchers an unusually clear window into the disease's progression. She said that his brain was one of the best and most intact specimens her team had ever handled, and that she believed it would contribute greatly to the overall understanding of the disease. In a strange way, the same brain that shocked everyone with its damage also became one of the most valuable research samples the center had ever received, precisely because the tissue hadn't degraded before it reached the lab. McKee also flagged something in Hernandez's genetics that added another layer to the story. Tests revealed a variant of the ApoE gene, which has been associated with higher risk for Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases, though whether it played a role in the severity of Hernandez's CTE is unclear. It raised the possibility that some people are simply built to be more vulnerable to this kind of trauma than others. That the same hits that leave one player relatively fine might do outsized damage to someone whose biology works against them. And she was careful, even in the middle of delivering findings this stark, to draw a line around what science could and couldn't say. McKee stressed that she could not connect the dots between the brain disease, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and the behavior of the 27-year-old who hanged himself in April while serving life in prison for murder. The damage was documented. The behavior was documented. Whether one caused the other was, in her own words, not something the pathology alone could prove. That distinction didn't stop the room from reacting the way it did. Reporters left that briefing with a story that would follow Hernandez's name for years afterward. Not just a murder conviction, not just a suicide in a prison cell, but a brain that looked decades older than the body it belonged to. To understand why this diagnosis landed the way it did, you have to understand who Aaron Hernandez was before anyone ever mentioned the word CTE. Aaron Joseph Hernandez was an American professional football player who was a tight end in the National Football League. And he played college football for the Florida Gators, earning first-team All-American honors and winning the 2009 BC's national championship game. He came out of the University of Florida as one of the most talented tight ends in the country, and the Patriots took notice. In April 2010, Aaron Hernandez was selected by the New England Patriots in the 4th round of the NFL draft. A 4th-round pick isn't a guarantee star, but Hernandez turned into exactly that. He formed one of the most dangerous tight end duos in the league alongside Rob Gronkowski, and by 2012, the Patriots believed in him enough to make a serious financial commitment. On August 27, 2012, Hernandez signed a 5-year, $40 million contract with the Patriots. That's not a role player's contract. That's the kind of money teams hand to a player they expect to build around for the next half-decade. But underneath the on-field production, a second life was unfolding that most fans never saw coming. His promising career was derailed when he was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of semi-pro football player Odin Lloyd in June 2013. And in May 2014, Hernandez was indicted in connection with 2 murders related to a drive-by shooting in 2012. The Lloyd case moved fast once police got involved. On June 17, 2013, a jogger found the body of Odin Lloyd riddled with gunshots at an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. About a mile from Hernandez's home, Lloyd, a 27-year-old semi-pro football player, had been dating the younger sister of Hernandez's fiancée, Shayanna Jenkins, and had last been seen around 2:30 a.m. with Hernandez and Hernandez's friends, Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, in a rented silver Nissan Altima, according to prosecutors. There was a chilling detail buried in the phone records that surfaced during the investigation. In the early hours of June 17, 2013, Hernandez and 2 associates had picked up Lloyd, who had been dating Hernandez's fiancee's sister, and Lloyd appeared concerned enough about the encounter that he texted his sister to let her know he was with Hernandez, writing, "You saw who I'm with," then adding NFL, "and just so you know." Minutes later, he was dead. The response from the Patriots organization was swift and public. On June 26, Hernandez was led from his home in handcuffs and charged with first-degree murder and 5 firearms violations. And the Patriots announced his release less than 2 hours after his arrest, with Hernandez soon dropped by corporate sponsors. Head coach Bill Belichick addressed the situation publicly not long after. "It's a sad day. Really a sad day on so many levels," Belichick said at a news conference a month later. The case ground through the court system for nearly 2 years before reaching a verdict. On April 15, 2015, Hernandez was found guilty of first-degree murder and weapons charges in Lloyd's death, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But that wasn't the end of his legal troubles. Prosecutors in Boston had already connected him to an earlier, separate case. In July 2012, 2 men, Daniel D. Abreu and Safiro Furtado, were killed in a drive-by shooting in Boston's South End. Hernandez stood trial for that double homicide while already serving his life sentence for Lloyd's murder. Just days after being acquitted of the 2012 murder charges, on April 14, 2017, he committed suicide in his jail cell. The timing was almost impossible to process. His death came just hours before the Patriots visited the White House to celebrate their latest Super Bowl victory. Teammates he once shared a locker room with were shaking hands at the White House while news broke that he'd been found dead. The details of that final morning were grim and specific. Hernandez, 27, was found hanging in his cell by corrections officers around 3:05 a.m. at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, having hanged himself with a bedsheet attached to his cell window. And he had also tried blocking his door from the inside with various items. There was no note. Hernandez was not on a suicide watch, and authorities had yet to find any suicide note in his cell, with officials saying Hernandez had given no indication he might try to take his own life. His family made a decision in the aftermath that would eventually lead to the discovery that made headlines months later. Hernandez's family donated his brain to BU's CTE Center after his April suicide. That single decision, made in the immediate grief of losing a son and a father, is the reason the world ever learned what was happening inside his skull. Without that donation, the diagnosis simply never happens, and the story stays a murder case and a suicide with no explanation attached. It's worth remembering, too, that Hernandez never used any of this in his own defense. Aaron Hernandez, who said he was innocent, did not raise CTE in his defense at either trial. Nobody in that courtroom, not the prosecutors, not the defense, not the jury, knew what McKee's team would later find. The diagnosis came entirely after the fact, built from tissue donated once he was already gone. Once the brain arrived at BU's CTE Center, the real work began, and it stretched on for months before McKee ever stood in front of a microphone. The first public confirmation came earlier than the full briefing, through Hernandez's own legal team. Former New England Patriots star Aaron Hernandez had a severe case of the degenerative brain disease, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, researchers said, and his lawyer announced a lawsuit against the NFL and the team, accusing them of hiding the true dangers of the sport, with Dr. Ann McKee, the director of the CTE Center at Boston University, saying Hernandez had stage 3 out of 4 of the disease, which can cause violent mood swings, depression, and other cognitive disorders. Attorney Jose Baez, who had represented Hernandez in his murder trials, was the one who first put the severity of the diagnosis into public words. "We're told it was the most severe case they had ever seen for someone of Aaron's age," Attorney Jose Baez said. Baez went further, connecting what he'd learned to behavior he'd personally witnessed while representing his client. Baez said Hernandez had shown signs of memory loss, impulsivity, and aggression that could be attributed to CTE, telling reporters, when hindsight is 20/20, you look back and there are things you might have noticed, before adding, but you don't know. That press conference in September of 2017 gave the world a headline. The Thursday briefing 2 months later, in November, gave the world the science behind it, and that's where McKee laid out the details that made this such an unusual case for researchers. She described the specific parts of Hernandez's brain that took the heaviest toll. The hippocampus, the structure most closely tied to forming and retrieving memories, showed physical shrinkage. The frontal lobes, home to impulse control and judgment, absorbed the most severe damage of all. This wasn't a diffuse, low-grade case. It was concentrated in exactly the regions that govern the kind of behavior most associated with the disease's symptoms. McKee explained that CTE develops from repeated trauma to the head, and not necessarily the dramatic, highlight reel kind of hit that gets a player pulled from a game. In football, this can happen not just from hard hits to the head that result in concussion, but from the repeated rattling of the brain inside the skull that occurs during tackles and falls to the turf. Repeated hits known as subconcussive hits that can result in a buildup of a kind of protein called tau in the brain. Every single play, even the ones that never make a highlight reel, carries the potential to add another layer of that buildup. The imaging itself, when shown to the room, left little room for interpretation. There was severe deposition of tau protein in the frontal lobes of the brain, and microscopic deposition of tau protein in nerve cells around small blood vessels, a unique feature of CTE. That last detail, the tau clustering specifically around blood vessels, is one of the defining microscopic signatures researchers look for when confirming a CTE diagnosis. It's not something that shows up from a single injury. This is substantial damage that took years to develop, not something that developed acutely, McKee said. Years, not a single game, not a single hit, years of cumulative trauma, likely stretching back well before Hernandez ever set foot on an NFL field. Through college at Florida, through high school, through however many seasons of youth football came before that. McKee summarized the scope of what she'd observed in blunt terms. Every place we looked, it was classic CTE, McKee said of Hernandez's brain. Not scattered patches, not an isolated pocket of damage. Wherever her team pointed a microscope, the signature of the disease was staring back at them. There was also the genetic wrinkle that came up during the Boston Globe's coverage of the same briefing. He may have had some susceptibility to developing a more aggressive type of CTE, McKee said. Combined with the ApoE variant flagged earlier by CNN's reporting, it painted a picture of a brain that may have been fighting an uphill battle against trauma from a biological standpoint, on top of whatever physical impacts it endured on the field. Months after the initial briefing, McKee's team offered even more detail through additional court filings and interviews, describing the damage using comparisons to players decades older. McKee likened the damage to Hernandez's brain to that of players well into their 60s, but Hernandez was only 27. That comparison, men in their 60s, is a jump even starker than the 46-years-old marker she'd used in her original press conference. And it underscores just how much the estimates of severity grew as more of the tissue was analyzed. For a research center that had, by that point, examined the brains of 202 deceased football players through Dr. McKee's broader body of work, and 468 brains total across all cases studied at BU. Hernandez's case stood alone. Nothing else in that entire collection matched the combination of youth and severity found in his tissue. The diagnosis didn't stay confined to a lab or a press conference for long. Within weeks, it turned into a legal battle that dragged the NFL, the Patriots, and a helmet manufacturer into court. The New York Times reported the diagnosis, as well as the fact that Hernandez's lawyer, Jose Baez, planned to sue the NFL and the Patriots for $20 million on behalf of Hernandez's 4-year-old daughter. That daughter, Avielle, became the legal face of a case that argued football itself had set the stage for everything that followed. The suit filed on her behalf didn't mince words about what it claimed the disease had done to her father. Aaron Hernandez succumbed to the symptoms of CTE, the suit stated, in part adding, as a result of the defendant's conduct and the injury experienced by Aaron, Avielle Hernandez was deprived of the love, affect, society, and companionship of her father while he was alive. The league's response came fast and left no ambiguity about how hard it planned to fight. The NFL responded to news of the suit, telling reporters on a conference call, "We intend to contest the claims vigorously." According to USA Today, this wasn't going to be settled quietly. There was, however, a legal obstacle baked into the case from the very beginning, one tied to a much larger settlement the NFL had already reached with retired players. The suit could face one major hurdle. Hernandez was not listed among the players who opted out of a concussion settlement with the league, and players whose careers concluded before July 2014 gave up the right to sue the NFL unless they opted out, with Hernandez's last NFL game coming in January 2013 before he was arrested, and ultimately convicted for the murder of Odin Lloyd. That settlement, worth a $1 billion agreement, in which the league agreed to pay families of players who suffered brain damage because of repeated head trauma while playing football, had been designed to compensate retired players broadly. Hernandez's case fell into a gray zone that nobody had anticipated. A player who hadn't retired in the traditional sense, but who also hadn't played another down after his last game. The legal wrangling over jurisdiction ran for months. The notice of voluntary dismissal without prejudice was filed in federal court in Boston, with the family's lawyers saying they were expanding the suit and planned to refile in Suffolk Superior Court because the issues involved in the complaint were state and not federal in nature. Eventually, the case landed in Massachusetts State Court. On October 16, 2017, Shayana Jenkins Hernandez filed a loss of parental consortium lawsuit in Massachusetts Superior Court against 3 NFL entities and helmet maker Riddell on behalf of her daughter, Avielle. The family's legal strategy made a point of not blaming the Patriots directly for anything that happened during Hernandez's professional career. Unlike many other brain injury-related claims against the NFL, Avielle's claim didn't blame the Patriots team or anyone in the league for their treatment of her father when he played. Because CTE is a progressive disease that takes years to develop, her claim was based not on the fact that he played NFL football, but that he played youth football, due to the NFL's deceptive and misleading information that was applied at the youth level, which the NFL also funded. It was a strategic pivot, aiming the case at the earliest years of his exposure to the sport, rather than his 3 seasons in New England. The case eventually reached a federal judge overseeing the broader concussion settlement in Philadelphia, and the ruling that came down closed the door on Avielle's claim. The 6-year-old daughter of the late NFL player Aaron Hernandez missed a 2014 deadline to opt out of the league's concussion settlement and couldn't separately pursue a $20 million suit over his diagnosis. a judge ruled. The reasoning turned on a technical but decisive question of timing. Under terms of the concussion settlement, the judge said, "The crux of the issue is whether Hernandez was seeking active employment as an NFL football player." As of July 7, 2014, adding, "He was not, because on this date Hernandez had been imprisoned without bail for nearly a year." There was also a bitter irony buried in the ruling. The timing of Hernandez's death actually worked against his own daughter's ability to claim compensation designed specifically for CTE-linked suicides. Hernandez's death in 2017 came too late for his family to seek up to $4 million in compensation for suicides related to chronic traumatic encephalopathy under the class action settlement. Had he died within the settlement's eligible window, his family may have had a far more direct path to compensation. Instead, they were shut out on a technicality tied to dates nobody involved in the original agreement had designed with a case like his in mind. The family's attorney pushed back hard on the ruling, framing it in terms that had nothing to do with legal deadlines and everything to do with a child growing up without a parent. Family lawyer Brad Sohn argued that Hernandez had not retired, but hoped to be exonerated and return to the league, saying no matter what anybody wants to say about Aaron Hernandez, his daughter will have to live with the fact that she doesn't have a parent for the rest of her life, and adding, "It remains our position that the NFL is responsible for the damages that she has because of his CTE." Underneath all of the procedural back and forth sat a simple financial fact about what Hernandez had lost. Hernandez spent 3 years with the New England Patriots before his 2013 arrest on the first of 3 homicide charges, and the Patriots terminated his $40 million contract, and he never returned to the NFL. A rookie contract extension meant to secure a decade of tight end production instead ended in a single afternoon, torn up within hours of his arrest. By the time all the legal dust settled, the story of Aaron Hernandez's brain had already reshaped how people talked about football, violence, and disease. McKee's Research Center didn't just walk away with a diagnosis. They walked away with one of the most valuable specimens in the history of their work. "This brain has been one of the most significant contributions to our work," McKee said, "because of Hernandez's youth and the organ's pristine condition when it was turned over by the medical examiner," adding, "The integrity of the brain tissue is so well preserved that we're advancing our understanding of the disease at the submicroscopic level. And we're able to do things in this particular brain that we aren't always able to do given the condition of a brain when we receive it." In an unsettling twist, the same tragedy that ended Hernandez's life at 27 handed researchers a tool that pushed CTE science forward faster than almost any other case they'd studied. The broader numbers around football and CTE only reinforced how urgent that research had become. A study around that time found signs of the disease in 110 of 111 NFL players whose brains were inspected. Hernandez wasn't an outlier in terms of diagnosis. CTE showed up in nearly every NFL brain examined by that point. What made him an outlier was his age, and the sheer speed and severity with which the disease had taken hold in a body that young. The story resurfaced again years later when a TV production revisited his life. A 10-episode miniseries entitled American Sports Story, Aaron Hernandez debuted on FX, exploring the rise and fall of NFL player Aaron Hernandez, the New England Patriots tight end who was convicted of murder in 2015 and died by suicide in his prison cell 2 years later. The renewed attention brought the CTE findings back into public conversation, this time filtered through the lens of years of hindsight and additional research into the disease. Even years after McKee's original briefing, researchers were careful to keep repeating the same caveat she'd offered from the podium, that a diagnosis, however severe, doesn't hand anyone a complete explanation for violent behavior. CTE is an incurable degenerative brain disorder caused by repeated head injuries that can lead to behavioral changes, cognitive impairment, and other brain disorders, with athletes and military veterans being more likely to develop it, although a direct link between CTE and violent behavior has not been definitively proven. That line has held up across nearly a decade of additional study. The disease is real, the damage in Hernandez's brain was real, and it was more severe than almost anything researchers had cataloged in someone his age. But the leap from tissue damage to specific violent acts remains something science hasn't closed the loop on, and probably never will for any single case. What's left in the end is a brain that told researchers something they'd never seen before, and a family still living with the consequences of a diagnosis that came too late to change anything. Too late to help him, and too late even to qualify for the compensation designed for exactly this kind of death. Aviel Hernandez grows up carrying her father's name into a legal and medical record that will likely be studied for decades, in a case that pushed CTE research forward while resolving almost nothing about the man at its center.